Well, good morning, Crossroads Church. My name is Mark Molina, and I'm going to be with you just for the next couple of moments. Before I do, let me just share just briefly a little bit about myself. I live in San Antonio, Texas, and for the last 17 years, I was on staff at a church here in San Antonio, Westover Hills Assembly of God. And over a year ago, the Lord started turning my heart towards missions, and I left full-time ministry to go into full-time missions ministry with One Child Matters. I know that you're very familiar with that ministry. In fact, your pastors went with me to Kenya last year. And so we've taken this step of faith and are working in full-time missions, helping kids all around the world, and we absolutely love it. At the end of my devotional, I'll share a little bit more about that and how you could consider getting involved. But before I do, allow me just to share some thoughts on you about faith versus fear. Faith versus fear. And I was looking before, while I was preparing this, I was looking up some different phobias that are out there that are just, you wouldn't even believe that they exist, but they do. And I want to read a couple of them. So this one, phobophobia. This is the fear of having a phobia. Can you imagine how exhausting that would be, walking around thinking that you're always going to get a phobia? That's what that is. How about this one? Sesquippedalophobia. I probably butchered that, but sesquippedalophobia is the phobia or the fear of long words. All right. Ablutophobia. Now this one I probably had as a junior high boy, like most junior hires, is the fear of bathing, fear of becoming clean. Who knows? And then this last one, arithmophobia. Arithmophobia is the fear of numbers. I know when we read that or you've heard that and you just think how crazy that is, but those are real fears that have impacted people today. And where did they begin? I think they began by someone creating a story and not looking at the facts, and it began to just continue to morph into a fear, and it it started to control them. And a lot of times that's what happens. We create stories and we don't look at the facts, and fear can overwhelm us. Now, in this season, we find ourselves in a battle of fear of the virus, a fear of injustice. There are so many things that are impacting our world and impacting our nation today. However, at the same time, I believe for us as Christ followers, we need to be the example of living out in faith. Now, that doesn't mean we're naive, doesn't mean that we don't take precaution, doesn't mean that we don't use wisdom, but it does mean that when we are faced with fear, when we have people around us that are faced with fear, that we do our part and look to faith. So allow me just to share some quick thoughts on you on fear versus faith. First of all, the first one I want to share is fear hides from the unknown, but faith investigates. Fear hides, faith investigates. You know, until we have enough courage to take steps towards the problem, we will allow fear to control us. And I'll tell you, just like I said a moment ago, fear can be so exhausting. It will block you from taking the logical steps needed. We need to investigate. We don't need to just sit back and just remain in fear. We need to investigate. We need to go take a look. You know, I'm going to reference David and Goliath here in just a moment, but that's exactly what David did. He investigated. He looked at it. They were just scared and hiding. But David went and he investigated instead of just walking in fear. The second thing I want to share is fear focuses on the problem, but faith will always focus on the answer. You'll never find the answer if you focus on the problem. You will never find the answer. I'm not saying, again, to dismiss all the issues. We need to look at the brutal facts. As Jim Collins says in his great book, Good to Great, you need to look at the brutal facts and address them. However, if we put all of our effort, our mind, body, and soul into looking at the problem, we will never be able to look at it through faith. And that's exactly what we need to do. We need to look at the circumstances around us globally, as a nation, personally, our community. We need to look at it through faith. The other one that I want to share, I'm completely convinced this affects us in so many ways, but fear drains us, but faith sustains us. Fear drains, faith sustains. In the Bible, again, speaking of David and Goliath, they were the underdog. And it was the underdog versus the champion. And it was so clear that the entire God's people, that entire army was living in fear at the battle. In fact, it says in 1 Samuel 17:11, it says that they were dismayed and terrified. Doesn't that sound familiar today? Many people right now are dismayed and terrified. They were not looking at it through the eyes of faith. And because of that, they found themselves living in fear. And I feel that if we will just have faith inside of us, we will be able to lean on that. And it will be our foundation that we know we have hope. And that's one thing that people don't have today is hope. So fear drains, faith sustains. Stand on that solid rock of faith. Another thing is fear retreats, faith advances. When David finally conquered Goliath in that one-on-one battle, immediately the Philistine army began to run. And here's what I've seen is that they began to run and retreat. Here's what I've seen about fear. Fear is very contagious. If you live in fear all the time, it's going to begin to spill over into your family, into your friends, to your coworkers. Again, I reiterate this because I think it's important that we say this. It does not mean that we never live in fear or that we dismiss the facts or we don't use wisdom. But it does mean if we live in fear all the time and it gets us to the point where we begin to retreat, I really feel like that will not only stop our advancing in our walk with the Lord, but it also is very contagious. Another thing I want to share is fear results from trusting in our own ability. Faith is a result of trusting in God's ability. David understood that because what did he say? The battle is the Lord's. It was not on him. He was not going to be the one that was going to win the battle. He believed that it was God going to begin to win the battle. David realized that if he did his part, God would do his. And David went out there in faith with the slingshot and some stones. And as a result of that, he said, I'm going to do my part, but I'm not going to rely on my ability. I'm going to rely on God's. Last thing I want to share with you is fear looks at the size of the problem. Faith looks at the problem in comparison to God. Let me say that one more time as I close. Fear looks at the size of the problem. Faith looks at the problem in comparison to God. The Israelite army looked at Goliath and said, how can David win? However, David looked at Goliath and said, how can I miss? He was 9 feet tall. David didn't look at how big he was. He looked at it in comparison to God, but he took an honest look and he said, how can I not miss? And because of that, David said he was able to defeat the giant. It would be like us, walking on the sidewalk and running in fear because of an ant. We need to understand who is fighting for us, who is on our side, and that's the Lord Almighty. And I want to encourage you to not allow yourself to live in fear, but trust in the hope that we have in Jesus. Does that mean that we will never have to deal with fear? We probably will. Fear will many times cause our faith to be stretched. But if we allow it to consume us, if we allow it to overwhelm us, we'll never be able to walk in faith the way God wants us to walk. So just remember that the battle, whatever battle you find yourself in, the battle belongs to the Lord. Well, as I kind of wrap this talk up, allow me just to share very quickly what I have the privilege of doing for kids all around the world. I work for an organization called One Child. We're in 14 different countries, and what we do is basically this. We bring hope to hard places. Hard places like Honduras or Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Zimbabwe, Kenya, the Philippines, Cambodia, Bangladesh, places where kids need hope. And we do that through these different avenues. One, we make sure that they have food. We make sure these kids are eating. We also make sure that they have an education. One Child believes that we can help change the trajectory of a child and teach them that they don't have to remain in poverty, but that they can move out of poverty. And education is a big part of that. Education has a sense of freedom. Then we also make sure they have medical attention. And when they have a need, when they're sick, whether it's through a dentist or through an illness in their body, we find a doctor, we make sure that they are taken care of medically. And then the most important thing that we do through One Child is we present the story and the love of Jesus Christ. And we would love for you to be a part of what we do. You can really touch the world right there from your home by sponsoring a child. In a few months, I hope to be joining you at one of your services, and I'll be able to share a little bit more about what we're doing, share some outcome measurements, but also give you the opportunity to become what we call a child champion. When you become a child champion, you are literally you are helping change the life of a child who lives in a tough place by bringing hope to them through One Child. So thank you so much for giving me a few moments of your time today. And thank you, pastors, for what you guys have already done for One Child. We so appreciate it, and we look forward to continuing to partner with you as we bring hope to hard places to every child that comes our way. Have a wonderful day. God bless you.